So, guys, I want to welcome you to the Petersen Automotive Museum for our next Inside the MotoMan studio. I don't know how many, by a show of hands, how many people have been here before for our shows before? Oh, a good amount of you. That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming back. In the past, we've met some very interesting people. We've met race car drivers. We've met CEOs. We've met designers. And I'll admit, full disclosure, this is not exactly the first time I'm talking to these people when you see them up on my stage. So, I had the very unique opportunity to get to know Peter Brock. He was very kind to spend a couple of hours over a couple of periods of time. And granted, like all you guys, I knew him originally from the Datsuns. I knew him from the Corvettes. Then I got really into the classic car world, and I knew him from the Shelbys. And I was like, man, this guy, he can do anything. But then I sat down with Gail and Peter, and I learned that I only knew 10% of Peter. Now, I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you are into music in the room here? How many of you guys are into music? You like music? Actually, not a lot of music people here. Okay. Well, of those people who are really into music, how many of you like jazz? Any Miles Davis fans there? Right here. Yeah. Miles Davis, he is the man himself. Kind of Blue. Amazing, amazing riff that was completely live. It was basically a jam session. But the interesting thing about Miles Davis is he influenced music, and not just jazz, for 40 years. He basically started, he was given the baton from Gil Evans. He worked with Charlie Parker in the 40s and 50s. And then he influenced jazz, bebop, jazz fusion, and even hip-hop by influencing Quincy Jones, who basically has picked up the baton today and brought music forward. Now, you're probably wondering, why are we talking about jazz music in a car museum? Well, I'd like to make the case for Peter Brock. He is that kind of influencer. Peter Brock picked up the baton from working with amazing people in the 50s, just like Miles Davis did. He worked with Harley Earl. He worked with Bill Mitchell. And then, not just a month ago, in Detroit, a design that Peter Brock came up with in 1958, which became public in 1959, influenced this car, the 7th generation of the car that he worked on back in the 50s. So with that, I want you guys to welcome me and welcome my guest to the journey, our journey here at the Petersen Automotive Museum, Peter Brock. Welcome, sir. Come on up.
Thank you all for coming. Really.
Peter, you said you had friends, but I had no idea. It's a hell of a party you got here.
Well, it's very flattering to see all these people out here. And all my friends, especially John, the whole front row here, I know everybody. So thank you, all of you, for coming.
Well, actually, true story. That is the most a guest has ever asked in terms of saved chairs.
Oh, great.
You've won that right out of the gate. So, Peter.
Yep.
We're going to start way back when. I kind of have a knack for finding pictures with embarrassing haircuts, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, I think you're ready. So, why don't we start with the
Oh, man, you're
where it's not necessarily
I'm the one
a
on the right
haircut,
there,
there's
in
no
case
hair.
you can't tell, you know, yeah.
Who is this?
That's my mom.
Now, you have a very interesting story. Peter Brock, okay, he's a car guy, and you think, you know, where do car guys come from? Peter Brock, you have quite a line of innovation in your family.
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't take as much advantage of it as possible, but I've had some pretty interesting people in my family, yes.
And who are these interesting
This
people?
is E.J. Hall, my grandfather. He was famous in World War I, designed the Liberty engine for World War I aircraft, and they really got going in production at the end of World War I, and they became the sort of the Merlin engine of World War I. At the end of World War II, you could go down and buy Merlin engines down here for about $50 a piece. The same thing, you could buy Liberty engines and the equivalent amount of money. But this is also his brother, Harold Hall, and some of the early airplanes that they were building in California. And they were racers and airplane builders, and had quite a deal. There was a lot of racing going on up in the Bay Area at that time, and it was very interesting to see. I didn't get a lot of these photographs until a while back.
You say the Bay Area, but really, you've kind of grown up in a lot of places.
Yes, with my folks divorced, I moved around a lot, so I never really stayed in any school for more than about a year or so. So got used to, kind of being on my own.
On your own, but it wasn't just America. Where else did you grow up?
Yes, lived in Mexico for quite a while. Late 30s, early 40s, lived down in Mexico.
Okay. And then we've got a bit of an interesting story here. You were introduced to cars at an early age.
See which?
You were introduced to cars at a very early age.
Well, I can remember riding around in my mom's 39 Continental, lying in the back of the where the top folds down, and she used to go on a tour, and I'd go back there and sleep in it. That was my introduction.
Who's the dog?
So, yeah, we had a lot of dogs in the family. I can't remember the name of that particular one, but I've always loved dogs. It's a great part of my life. Yeah, got interested in airplanes. Built a lot of model airplanes when I was a kid, and so it was. Got free flight especially going into free flight aircraft when down in the peninsula area that I lived, and that was really fun. That was the Continental Air that I went around with. It's very
I'd like to point out that is the convertible version of the same car that Sonny got done in on the causeway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that you're Godfather fans.
Yeah.
It's a good audience, and some of them like music too.
Yeah. Gosh, I had never seen that picture. That's great.
Well, I think we want to see another picture, don't you?
Of course.
Does anybody want to see the comedian that is Peter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things you have to learn how to do in life is to ride a unicycle. If you can't ride a unicycle, you really haven't, worked out. So it's one of those challenges. Somebody says, "Can you ride this?" And you say, "Yeah, sure." And then you spend, weeks learning how to ride the thing. But they really are fun.
How many of you guys are familiar with Art Center College of Design? Oh, wow, everybody is. This is a good California audience.
Yep.
It turns out there is a new test to get, at least it was a test back in your day, to get into Art Center.
Yes.
How did you do this? These things weigh, this is clay. Oh, technical difficulty, sorry guys. Can you guys hear Peter? Yeah. Well, you guys in the back, can you guys hear Peter?
Just raise your hand, say louder or whatever if you can't hear.
Yeah, the Pontiac guy in the back, can you hear Peter? Nice.
So.
A little louder?
I'll turn to speak up a little bit more.
Okay.
No, the model influence was really big, when I was a kid. And of course, it was World War II, so a lot of the model building had to do with World War II aircraft. And, as kids, we all had these little spotter cards so that you'd know what aircraft were flying over in case any Jap Zeros came over, you knew, when to hide. So, but I knew all the World War II aircraft at that time. I was really into that. And then, of course, got interested in cars as that came along and started making models.
So interest into military.
Yep.
But I find it interesting you were still getting letters from your mother.
Yep.
This man, actually, I really got to say Gail, has organized your life. I have never seen this many pictures of one's life. And I am a pack rat.
Yeah.
But you take the prize, my friend.
Yeah.
But then, okay, so you go to Art Center.
Right.
And you're really into cars. So what kind of cars were you playing around with?
Well, these photographs I took here when I was about 14, this is long before Art Center. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area in Sausalito, and I think about 11 or 12 years old, and got my first job at Bill Breeze's Sports Car Center there. I talked him into letting me work for free so that I could hang around the cars. And the guy on the lead car there, number 15, is Nato Borjolt, who turned out to be one of the first fabricators that I'd ever seen build something. And had a lot of influence in my life because I seen a car, built right from scratch. It was pretty neat. And then he took me out for a ride in the car, and it really changed my life.
Speaking of building from scratch,
yeah.
You had an interesting journey with this one, correct?
Well, this was a 46 Ford that was built by Art and Jerry's down here in the Los Angeles area, and I found it on a used car lot, half finished up in San Francisco, and I sold my first car, which is MGTC, to buy it. And then later, that was my first car there, that 49 TC. And I'd gotten that when I worked at Breeze's Sport Car Center. It had blown engine. It was sitting in the back of the shop, and I got the guys that helped me build it up the engine and stuff. So I love that car. And then when I moved down the peninsula, I got into hot rods, and of course I sold that car and built up my El Mirage Chop Channel in Section 46 car, and won the Oakland Roadster Show twice, 1 year for the full custom, the other one's for People's Choice.
And how old were you when you won this award?
About 17 there, I think, yeah.
So 17, you're winning awards for cars you design and build.
Yeah, yeah.
I was building car models, and I had no awards at that time.
So.
Here's the car again.
Yeah, all the guys in the hot rod community thought I was absolutely screwy because I painted blue stripes over the top of the car, but I was, so impressed with what Briggs Cunningham had done in the 52 running over there at Le Mans with the first Corvette team. And I don't know if you know, at that time, all the international races, every nation had its own colors, which was white with blue stripes. And the early cars, just the chassis was painted one color and the body was another. So Cunningham was the first guy to take that idea and put blue stripes over the top of it. Yeah. And of course, I had to copy on my Ford-Lac. And all the hot rod guys thought I was crazy, but it was fun anyway.
So interesting. Now, we had Bob Lutz here, and everyone, and a lot of guys were here for that Bob Lutz show. And one of the things we learned that was really interesting, Bob Lutz did not graduate from high school until he was 22. Everyone thinks Bob Lutz is a successful guy. Everyone knows you as a designer. So everyone thinks, well, this guy probably went to Art Center, got a degree.
It was a very tough school. That's why it took a long time to get through.
Yeah. But you got a job before you even graduated.
So no, I didn't get through Art Center, no. Yeah. Jesus.
This is your General Motors, not really an acceptance letter. This was already them saying, you know what, we love you, we want you to come to work with us. So why don't you tell us the story about how you left Art Center and then like 2 hours later, Bill Mitchell gives you a call.
Well, it
happens to all of us.
My mother was financing school for me and did not approve of it. She'd wanted me to be an architect and wanted me to go back to Stanford, which I just hated. And
we all
so, yeah, I came down here on spring break, in Balboa Island, Southern California, and went down and took a look at Art Center and decided that was really where I wanted to go to school. And so I went there for quite a while until the funds were cut off at that point. And it was like she sent me a letter, either you go back to school or you're on your own. Here's $100,
Here's $100, go find a job,
yeah,
kid.
Right, go find a job. So I called Chuck Jordan, who later became the VP of design at GM. He was a headhunter at that time. Had come out looking at all the advanced students' work, see who he was going to hire. And by then I'd gotten to about fourth or fifth semester. I'd gotten to know Chuck pretty well and told him I really wanted to go to work for General Motors because that was where I thought the exciting things were going on, especially in engine design, the stuff that Ed Cole had been doing. So
now, exciting things. You got there. And
well,
where did you
I
go?
called Chuck, and I said, hey, no more money here. Is there a chance that I can get some way that I could get into GM? And he said, there'll be an airplane ticket for you tomorrow.
Airplane ticket waiting for you.
So I was 19 years old, and they flew me back to GM, and they accepted me, and they said, you know, you got, I don't know, 6 months, a year to either make it or you're out of here. And luckily, I got some great help back there.
So at General Motors, you were working, most people step back, and some of you guys have been to the show before, we've learned about hubcap duty, which is you go to design, and what do you do in hubcap duty?
Well, what you go in, when you first start there, they put you in an orientation studio, and they determine, you know, what your skills are. And really, I was still learning very much. There was so much great talent at Art Center to begin with. There was guys that had won the Fisher Body Craftsman's Guild, that already were professional designers that had come back to school. So I was really pretty far down the experience level in that. But Chuck knew I was really passionate about design. It had seen something in me that said it was worthwhile to get me back there. So I got back there, and then when you go in and start working at General Motors, everything is a much larger scale because you start working on full size. So the first thing they do back there is you have to make all your own tools. So had to, you know, carve out all my own sweeps and make all my own clay modeling tools. And, you know, you learn by doing, and by being around these guys that have been in the industry for years, you know, you're in awe of the skill that's back there. But everybody was super helpful. You know, if you didn't know how to do something, everybody wanted to help you out.
But you got put into, after that orientation studio, you didn't go and design hubcaps or air vents on dashboards.
So what they do is when they take the young designers, they sort of figure out what you're going to do. But all young designers go down into what they call an advanced design studio where they do the concept cars. And I got put in, there were two of these advanced studios called research studios, Research A and B, and they're way down sort of in the cellar area of General Motors. And in one studio, they were working on the Firebird 3s. I don't know if you ever remember the Firebird series, the cars. They're awesome. Really wild stuff that Harley Earl, who is really pretty much the father of American design, had started building all these dream cars, and the Firebird one, they're old. And so in working down in that studio, there was no chance that I was going to ever, at that time in my life, I was going to work upstairs in a production studio where the really top designers were. I was down there still, you know, the guys were looking me over, so to speak, you know, down there in the bullpen. But a very interesting thing turned out politically at that time is Harlow Kurz, who's the head of GM design, GM management at that time, had looked at the bottom line. He was probably responsible for making more money than anybody else at General Motors. Realized that so much money was being spent on racing that probably General Motors would make a lot more profit if they got out of the racing business. And it wasn't sports car racing. The real money was going into drag racing, and it was going into stock cars, especially drag racing. And there was another thing that there was hanging over their head. With this drag racing thing, the NHRA had approved sort of factory-built lightweight drag cars, and they set up this junior stock car racing class where you could go buy the lightest Chevy with the biggest, baddest engine, you know, with all the panels were made out of aluminum in the front and the axles were offset. You could go down to a showroom and buy this car, which is at that time was a pretty fast car, maybe a
But Harley Earl had a bit of a different take on this. Harley Earl came to you and he gave you a different remit. He was thinking racing from a different continent.
Well, the whole thing was is that he looked at how much money was being spent on racing in general and went around to the rest of the manufacturers, to Ford and to Chrysler, and said, you know, we've got out of the racing business, but we've all got to agree that we're going to get out of racing. That was called the AMA ban, and came in June of 1957. So prior to that point, just prior to that point, Harley Earl had decided that He was going to save the Corvette, which was doing miserably. It was doing so badly that they were thinking of canceling the whole program. Got together with Zora Duntov, and they got a 300 SL chassis, put Ed Cole's new V8 in it, and they built a car called the Sebring SS. And they took it to Sebring in 1957. But so much time had been spent on designing the car that it didn't have any development time on it at all. And one of the main problems from an engineering standpoint is that they didn't get to put big brakes on it. Jaguar and Dunlop had already figured out in 1955 that a race car had to have disc brakes. But General Motors didn't want to do that. They wanted to stick with ceremetallics on a big Chrysler drums, like you see on a lot of hot rods around here at that period. That was the really trick brake setup on it. So the car wouldn't stop, and it didn't handle very well. And then the AMA ban came in, announced at that point, and that was the end of all racing. So unfortunately, this beautiful car had decreed that it was going to go to the crusher and be destroyed. And it would have been if it hadn't have been for Zora Duntov. He sneaked the car out of General Motors and, quote, gave it to the Indianapolis Speedway Museum where it resides today. Otherwise, it would have been crushed. Luckily, there had been a development car called the Mule that was in fiberglass, and Bill Mitchell bought that chassis for $1 and came back and said, I don't care what's going on with management, we're going to build a new Corvette in secret. He could not take the project upstairs into the production studios because it would have been discovered by upper management. So going completely against management decree, he came down to the research studio with a bunch of young kids down there. There were 4 designers in there. He had just gone over the Turin show in Italy in 1957, saw all these beautiful little streamliners that were running, 700, 600 cc's or whatever, that were made, by Farina and Scaglietti and God, just every little Italian shop was building these little streamliners. But they were all very, very similar, and they had a very crisp line around the belt line all the way around, and then little aerodynamic shapes over each wheel. So that became the impetus that he came back. He felt that he was in aesthetic territory that would be accepted by the American public, laid out this whole series of photographs and said, this is the direction I'd like you guys to follow to build a new Corvette. And over a period of weeks, I came up with it. I came up with the drawings that Bill Mitchell liked. He took a shine to me.
And how old were you at this point?
At that point, I was about 21.
So 21, you were working on this iconic
20
design.
21.
Anyone think this looks
familiar?
familiar?
I think
Does
20
this look
in
like
that
anything?
picture there, yeah.
Something going somewhere? Yeah? Anyone see our episode with the current design director of Corvette that was pointing out this very car?
Yeah.
Mr. Miles Davis?
So you can see there, that became the Corvette, and then this later became some of the Grand Sport lines and stuff that were transferred.
So did you
over
work
that
on the
car.
Grand Sport as well?
No,
you didn't work on the
Grand Sport
you
was
had
done
left
after I'd
just
already
after
left,
that.
yeah.
But now here's the thing. Corvettes, I mean, how many Corvette guys are in the audience here? Got to have a couple, I know we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got a couple here. A lot of the audience here, even the Datsun and the Shelby guys, know about the Corvette days at General Motors. And there was a lot of discussion, who did the 63? Was it Shinoda? Was it you? How was it influenced? All that kind of stuff. And we even have a letter here from Bill Mitchell. And there's the car. There's your car. But what was interesting, and by the way, look at who's looking cool in Florida down here.
Yeah, the project for Harley Earl and Zora was so secret at the time, they wouldn't even let all the rest of the designers within General Motors styling know that they were building this car and going to race it at Sebring. But, the word kind of leaked out that it was going to go. So a group of us took 3 Corvettes, and we drove them. We left work on, I think, Wednesday night or Thursday, and drove round the clock to get down to Sebring to see the SS run. So this is just when we'd arrived down there in this 57 Fueling.
So you're 20 years old, taking a road trip with your
Right.
designer buddies from Michigan to Florida to go to the race.
Right, to watch,
We all did that
watch
when we were
our
20.
car race, And it was very, very exciting
Yeah.
to see. We had Duntov had hired Sterling Moss and Juan Manuel Fangio to test the car, to run it at Sebring, and because, you know, he wrote down all the numbers on it.
And did this one still have the Mercedes chassis?
Yes, this is a Mercedes chassis, yeah.
So underneath this Corvette
Yes, right.
is a Mercedes.
Yeah.
So exactly the opposite of what Chrysler used to do in the days.
So they tested it, and of course the brakes didn't work, and the car overheated, and it didn't have any development. It could have been a great car if they'd had about another, you know, 2-3 months to run the car and develop it. But since the car was paid for and built by Harley Earl, he was more interested in the styling of the automobile and its presentation to the public. So all of the work was done on the mule, which, you know, the faster it would go, the more parts that they'd take off it. So finally it was just ended up really chopped off, and it really ran good, but that wasn't the race car. So they wheeled out the race car, and it was just a stunner, beautiful electric blue, all finished up. But it lasted 20 laps, and it was done.
The current designer of the VP of design, Ed Welburn, he loves your car. That's like his favorite car to drive, his heritage car.
Well, the car that we built up on it, yes, that was the built on that chassis, and that was what was at that time called the XP87, and known as Mitchell's Racer, because it was the car that we built on the SS chassis with a 92-inch wheelbase. And then when the car went into production, of course, it had to go to 98. And then Larry Shinoda and Tony Lapine, who went on to become the head of design at Porsche, those two guys actually did the lines for the 63 Corvette. But those lines were lifted right off the car that I'd done with Mitchell.
Now we know, a whole room here knows about the Corvette. Cool car. But very few people know about this.
That was a little project that I was very interested in doing. It. Remember, I was just 19 out of school. You don't have much money as a kid, and I was working in the studio one night, and Harley Earl walks in, and of course nobody ever spoke to Mr. Earl. He was a very imperious.
How tall was he?
About 6'4",
wow.
Always dressed absolutely charcoal gray, perfectly, just all the time. And if he ever came into the studio, he came in with all of his lieutenants to look at all the design work. He'd never speak to a designer. He'd speak to one of his lieutenants and tell them to make a change, and then the lieutenant would tell the designer what to do. So he had this formal wall around him where he never spoke to anybody. So I'm in the studio at night kind of working there. I just loved working there. Walks in, he turns out to be just the nicest, friendliest guy in the world, and asked me, he said, well, yeah, there, young fellow, what do you think we're doing around here? And I told him the truth. I'd just seen the prototype 58s and 59s going together, and you know what those look like. They were slathered in chrome with 3 colors and gigantic cars. And I told him, I said, I thought the cars looked pretty bad. And they're beautifully built, but I thought we were going in the direction. And he said, well, what else do you think we should be doing? And I said, with the economy of scale of things that we can do here in General Motors and looking at what's happening on the sales of foreign cars over here, you can see that foreign sales are getting stronger and stronger. He says, I think we should build a small car, and I think especially we should build a car that you can sell to students that want to go to college. Something you can drive around the campus. Maybe it'd only have top speed of 65 miles an hour.
But you also had a delivery version that you designed too.
So this car became the Cadet. It was a little 67-inch wheelbase coupe.
I think we should show them really to scale here, using Peter as the model.
So that's a little seating buck we did for the car, and just a tiny, tiny little car.
Tell us again, what year did you do this?
That was done also in 57, yeah.
57. So imagine the size of a 57 Bel Air.
Yeah.
And Peter's working on this in a basement and talking directly to his boss's boss.
Again, the thing you got to understand that secrecy is so incredible at styling that every studio is like a cell. If you work in that cell, you are not allowed to go in any other studio, and nobody in any other studio is allowed to see what you're doing. Only top management can go into these studios and see what's going on. So everything is completely secret. The only people that can move around to any of these different studios are the mail girls, because they're delivering the mail, and some of the artisans in there who are doing the wood and clay work, they go into the different ones. And they kept coming in and seeing this funny little car that we're working on down there and realized that, you know, this is going to be a car that sells for $1,000 and it's a perfect commuter. And they're all saying, you know, God, I'd like a car like that.
So let's level set expectations. $1,000, how much was that like a regular Chevy sedan, like a 210?
Well, they were all, you know, up around, you know, $2,000 to $3,000.
So you're talking less than half price for this car.
Yeah, for a little car like that.
And you brought in some competition to compare it to.
You can see how small it is there compared to an Isetta.
This is General Motors working on this.
So, but, you know, I was influenced by the little, what they call Etzerini cars in Italy at that time. The Moretti was a little beautiful little car at that time. So this was just perfect for a car to run around the campus.
I thought Moretti was a beer.
And I kind of designed it around about a 2-cylinder BMW engine, air-cooled, would have had a little automatic transmission and stuff. So that's the crew there.
The size of the whole team around it as well.
Yeah.
It'd be like a clown car. Get them all in there and see if you can
standing
drive
back
around.
there, Chuck Jordan's the tallest guy in the back there.
Yeah.
And that's me standing next to him in the white shirt with a tie on. Yeah.
And you actually brought that delivery to life as well.
But anyway, Harley Earl was so excited about this program. You know, I mean, we'd done this program together. You know, I mean, here's the oldest guy in the place and the youngest kid in this car, and he was really excited about it. And we got the car done full scale and coupe side. You know, he said, you know, he had this strange way of talking, kind of stuttering. Jesus, fellas, we should build a little sedan delivery. That way all the pizza shops and drugstores and garage delivery things should do it. So we built a second one, another Pushmobile concept car. And so there was all this enthusiasm of doing small cars at General Motors, completely in the face of what was going on of building super large cars. Hadn't told the rest of management about it at all.
Now, speaking of management, now hold on a minute here.
Right.
So now we're starting to get to the exit of General Motors, view from General Motors.
Yeah.
So this car, Harley ended up, or Bill Mitchell took it to the design review in the Dome.
Right. The end of the year, they have a giant review. They bring in all the top dealers from all of the United States and top distributors and everything, and they show them what's going to be going on the next 2 years and all the new cars and stuff. Of course, they had all these giant chrome behemoths, you know, very much like that black convertible over there. That's the size of the cars that were being shown at that time, just slathered with chrome and everything. So Harley couldn't wait to show it to management, you know, that he wanted this whole new direction, you know, wanted to have something to, it would be competitive with the stuff that was coming in from Europe that we could sell in Europe. He got really into the whole idea. And so the last thing that they showed that evening was they brought it up on a turntable and they had, you know, an orchestra there and lights and music and the whole thing. And it was absolutely stunned silence. Nobody knew what to say. You know, because here's this funny little car after all these great big things. And Harlow Curtis, same guy that killed off, you know, racing in the United States, the MA band, probably had a few drinks too many at that time. He got up and says, you know, we don't build small cars at General Motors. And the lights went off, and that was the end of it. So I was really crushed, and Earl was as well. And the car never went anywhere. And then a few months later, they realized that maybe they had made a mistake, and they took the XP number, the experimental number on it, applied it to another studio, put some new guys on it, and that car became the Corvette.
And then you left.
Yeah, I left at that point.
You left.
I'm 21 now. I can go back to California and get my license.
Get your racing license.
Racing license, yeah.
Now, how many of you guys have seen Peter's display over here? The Nissan courtesy of Mr. Omar Liggett. Omar Liggett, a little round of applause for Omar for giving me that car like for the 5th time now. Omar, you're never getting it back. And then next to it, what is that car next to that Z?
Well, that's a later version of the old Yeller, the cars that I worked on with Max.
Who's Max?
Max Balchowski. The guy probably had more influence on what I did with design engineering than anybody else. He ran a little shop up here with his wife, Ina, called Hollywood Motors. And he built the best American specials. They were driven by everybody. Dan Gurney drove them, Bob Drake drove them, Shelby drove them. And they were the big competitors with the big money guys out here that had the Ferraris and Maseratis. And all the time that I was working at Max's shop, I used to chase parts for him during the day, and in exchange, he gave me a little corner of the shop to work on my own race car. And I kept talking to Max. I said, God, you've got to allow me to just do a new body. These things are so ugly. And he just laughed. He said, you don't get it. He says, that's done on purpose. And they were, you know, they were built with 50 Chevy truck rear fenders, you know, Harley Davidson motorcycle screen in the front. But they underneath the cars were very, very well engineered for their time, and he used as many production components as possible. So they were called junkyard dogs, you know.
They cleaned up in America, didn't they?
And he won many, many, many races against the top drivers and top cars here in Southern California, and he became a local hero. He's not as well known in the rest of the United States, but Max was a real leader in sports car racing in Southern California.
But you started racing.
Yeah. So that was my first car. I'd bought up a Cooper when I left. That car originally started out as a factory team car for a Cooper at Le Mans in 1954, and it was one of the few Manx tail Coopers that had side-by-side seating in it. In fact, it had a tube that ran right down the middle of it. Yeah. And so I raced that the first couple of seasons here in Southern California, and it was a lot of fun to drive. You could drive it real sideways.
Now, most of you guys that know me know I'm a huge Lotus guy. Like, I love Lotus. I've had a couple of them. I like the lightweight thing.
Well, this is a car that I bought after the Cooper. This is my Lotus. And it handles so much differently. It had a lot of understeer, where the Cooper, you could just throw it around, and it was great. So the first thing I did, I went up and crashed it in turn 6 on the first day I had it out. You know, boy, I really felt stupid, you know. But, you know, like any race car, they're pretty easy to repair, so put it back together.
Is this the repaired
So
livery?
here's the aluminum body all repaired.
Yeah.
You know.
Look at the difference there.
So.
Kind of
But
like
it was
American
done by
Airlines.
Frank Costin, who is probably one of the best automotive aerodynamicists out there.
But that wasn't the only British car you raced.
No, I ran other cars for other people. This is a TVR, probably one of the worst handling cars that ever driven. God, it was awful.
They
It
do
had
call
so
them
much
the
bump
British
steer in the
Corvette.
rear, you couldn't keep it straight. But it was fun to drive, and like any race driver, you offer them a car, sure, I can drive it.
Yeah.
So.
But then from there, you went really high up the handling spectrum, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I like the big stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I got the opportunity because I'd done I knew Riverside fairly well from testing out there and with the school, so I was offered ride in this Merc out there, and of course I was really comparatively slow to all the fast guys that came up from the Carolinas, but I knew how to make the car last. The brakes probably lasted maybe 3 laps to begin with, so I just drove it as smoothly as I could to get it around. And by the end of the race, I was up to 3rd place. And on the last lap before the checker, the engine blew, and I think I ended up 8th or 12th or something like that. So that was the end of my NASCAR period. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, your NASCAR period led you to stardom, sir.
The which?
Led you to stardom.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, just a little backstory here. Peter's wife, Gail, lovely. Big round of applause for Gail, because she organized. All these pictures are courtesy of Gail. They came with a suitcase like this big. So I went through literally 500 pictures, and I didn't get the story on every one of them. So I get this picture, these series of pictures, and I'm like, who the hell are these people? Who is filming Peter? Because now you're becoming a race car driver. Yeah. And, I shoot car to car, and we have rigs that we mount to the cars, but this is interesting where your guy literally hangs on like almost a coffin that's hanging off a Corvair, which is bad enough.
Right.
But I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, who is telling Peter what to do? And I'm like, that guy looks familiar, but I can't put my finger on it. Who is it?
Well, you have to go back on the story a little bit farther. Just get a little backstory on it.
Yeah. Peter likes short stories, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that.
Drivers that we had at Shelby American was a guy named Alan Grant, and he'd come down with a friend of his, a guy named George Lucas, who also wanted to be involved in racing. And George...
Film school student at the time.
So George's racing career had been cut short in high school because he'd crashed the car and destroyed himself and knew he wasn't going to be a race driver. So he came down with the idea of going to USC film school and learning a little bit about movies. So with the introduction with Alan Grant and George Lucas, he got his first directorial job as a student film, doing a little film, and of course he loved racing, so we set up this deal. We borrowed a Lotus 23, and he made his first little film out there. And while we were out there, you can see that little open wheel car. There are other people up there asking about it. But anyway, make a long story short, we made this little film with George Lucas, and that was his very first picture.
And who else was driving with you there?
Well,
way,
it's a little open wheel car that's, excuse me.
Yeah.
James Garner, excuse me, I'm thinking
so
Garland.
So many stars, you can't keep
I've got
up,
two names.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I had been doing some instruction out at the school at all with Frankenheimer. They were doing that movie Grand Prix, so yeah. Garner had been out there to do some instruction on it, and Bob was out there as well. So we made this film, and it has become a famous little film. You can actually see it online.
So designer, race car driver, and now movie stunt driver.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then you met this man.
Well, I actually met Carroll in '59. He just won Le Mans. He did announce his retirement, but he wanted to finish up a couple of races in the 1960 season, and he came into Max's shop and made a deal to drive the old Yeller cars in the last couple of races, and as a result, he was voted by Sports Illustrated the driver of the year in 1960. But anyway, that's where we met, and he had mentioned the fact that he wanted to start a driver's school out at Riverside, and of course, the chance to drive race cars every day was something that I'm looking forward to. So
but you didn't just drive race cars.
What's that?
You didn't just drive race cars. You tested them.
Okay.
And you were the school instructor.
Yeah, right. Actually, Ken Miles was really the guy that, I think I had 7 races in my logbook at that time. I was hardly qualified to be a race driving instructor, but during all the testing.
If you look at this brochure, it says wonderful things about you.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, we were very good. I learned from Shelby on that, you know. If it isn't real, you just write it down, it becomes real. You know? But with Ken Miles out there testing a lot, I learned a tremendous amount, and he imparted to me all the things that he had learned in all of his years about racing, and that instructions that he gave me, I simply applied to the school, and has become a very successful method of teaching.
Again, I don't think you know what you had in those pictures. So, okay, we drive and test cars for a living. Peter was keeping track of the fuel economy of a Shelby in, what, the 50s,
well, this
60s?
is all GT350 stuff, because
yeah.
that became the next major project for Shelby, and as a test driver out there, we were responsible.
Performance numbers, all this stuff.
Yeah. So
this is better than a Marty report.
What's that?
This is better than a Marty report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, development is really more important than racing. I mean, you've got to spend at least 3 times more development than you do racing.
Yeah.
So.
Then Shelby had a significant problem, which you helped him with.
Well, our significant problem was that after we'd won the United States Road Racing Championship in 1963, Carroll decided that he wanted to go to Europe and race the Cobras in Europe. And our problem was that the Cobras were not fast enough to compete in Europe. They were ideally suited for the American tracks, which are about 2.5 miles. So they were basically, you know, point and shoot out of the corners and lightweight, good accelerating car. But the chance of running in Europe or the GTOs had been introduced already a year before this.
And these were closed cars.
Yep.
These were closed cars you were racing against.
Well, we were just racing the open cars here to run the US RC Championship with the open Cobra Roadsters. So there was no way that that car was going to be fast enough to take it over to Europe. The GTOs
Where did it top out?
about
Where did it top out?
165 mile an hour is about top speed for a Cobra.
With that little thing you put on top of it?
With the little aluminum top?
Yeah, there was an aluminum top on some of those things, yeah.
They didn't improve it very much. In fact, probably with the extra weight and stuff, it didn't make much sense on.
So why are you practically chopping this guy's head off?
So I explained to Carol that, you know, I thought there was some free horsepower in making a better shape for the car. And he said, well, what do you mean? I, you know, tried to explain. I said, well, you know, as an example, if you double the speed of a car, you know, say from 100 mile an hour to 200 mile an hour, and that's the range we want to get into, you double the speed of the car, the drag goes up by the square. And I said, all we have to do to make the car faster is reduce the frontal area and reduce the drag, and you get free horsepower at the top because we can't get any more, you know, engine power. The guys that are developing the engine, I think we were getting about 365 to 385 horsepower out of the 289s at that time. And the chances of getting the required horsepower, because the horsepower required goes up by the cube as you double the speed. So that wasn't going to happen. But I explained if we can reduce the drag on the car, there's some free speed at the top end. And he said, well, is it going to work? And I said, I don't know. Nobody's ever done what I want to do. And he said, well, okay, you can go ahead and try it. I said, what's the budget? He says, well, you don't have one. So I said, well, what's the next thing? He says, well, you can have Skip Hudson's old crash car that we crashed down at Daytona, and you can build your idea on that car. So fortunately, we had a young mechanic fabricator in from New Zealand, a guy named John Olson, who wasn't part of the California group of guys in the shop at that time. Phil Remington, our chief engineer, who was totally against the project at that time, said, well, we'll assign John, you can work on the car. And he didn't like Miles very much either at that time. He said, you and Miles and Olson can go build this car over in the corner. So we took the body off the crash car and built this Daytona Cobra Coupe. And as the car kept going along within the shop, we got a little more help, and guys started to take some interest in it. So we got it finished up to the point where it would run, took it out to Riverside, I think February 1st in '64. And it was pretty fast. Here's the car here. And at that point, you know, Miles didn't take more than a few laps in the car and realize how quick the car was, because he knew every bush, every rock on the track, how many RPM he'd be turning coming out of each corner, how fast, how many revs he'd be going down the main straight. And he knew right off that the car was going to be a winner. We were about 3.5 seconds a lap faster. And we didn't know what the top speed was. There wasn't even a speedometer in the car, but sort of a, you know, outhouse calculation, we were at least 20 miles an hour faster. So he called Shelby and went right up to the office, called Shelby and said, you know, the car's really good. We should progress with it. But he says it handles so badly because we don't have enough rubber underneath the car. He says it's pointless for me to stay out here and do any testing. Call Goodyear and see if they can get us some new tires for Daytona. And if it is, we can, you know, we can test there. So Goodyear said, you know, we don't have any tires. We can't build them for you that fast. But we do have a new front for the stock cars we've been developing, and you can try those. We'll air freight them out. And they air freighted the tires out overnight. We stuck them on the existing Halibrands we had, and they stuck out about 1.5 inches on either side of the body, which made them illegal. So to run at Daytona the first time, they had to put these little spats on the outside of the rear fenders just to widen it out to make it legal. And that's the way we went to Daytona with the car, and it was so fast down there that now with the tires sticking on it and running on the banking, it was running very well. And the car had been built almost like a tailored suit for Miles, and for some bizarre reason that nobody's ever really determined, but it was just one of the things that Shelby did. He decided that Ken was not going to drive the car. He was going to put Holbert and Miles McDonald in the car, who were two of our very best drivers. There was certainly no thing against either of those guys putting him in the car, but they had zero experience in the car because Miles had done all this, whatever little testing we had in it. So we went down to Daytona, and Holbert got in the car, and he was immediately super fast on the car. He just came in after a couple laps and said to Miles, who'd been made the team manager, he said, you know, he says, there's no point in turning this thing how high, how far down should I back it down, because I can just go by the Ferraris easily. So I think we ended up backing it down twice, down about 800 RPM, and at that point we were just about the same speed as the Ferraris, and at that point they decided, okay, we better determine what fuel mileage we're getting on the car. So they did some calculations on how much fuel were being used, and we were about 21 to 25% better fuel mileage. So that was the big advantage of this particular car, not that it was so much faster, but that it had such efficiency, because we could go out there and we could run, just stay with the Ferraris, dog the Ferraris, and then as soon as they came into pit, we just keep going. We'd probably get another maybe 1 or 2 laps farther each time, and over that period, we would easily win the race.
And that is not the only place you went with those cars.
So
where else did you take that car?
What else on it?
Where else did you take that car?
Well, the first thing to do after the success of the car was it went to Sebring, which was the next race, and it ran second most of the race. But then the lead car that that Dan Gurney was driving crashed in the middle of the night, and it ended up winning the GT class at Sebring, and that pretty much convinced Ford that they should back the program and that we should go to Europe. So that was the whole thing. Is that
there you are in Europe.
Carroll wanted to go to Europe, and he finally figured a way to get the cars to Europe, and had by that time ordered some more chassis built. And the only problem was that we didn't have enough of a crew to build the cars. So the chassis were finished up. They'd be flown over from AC, semi-finished, and then the engines would be installed, and the cowl hoops would be put on, and then the cars would be flown to Italy. And Carroll made a deal with Carrozzeria Grand Sport in Modena to build the next 5 cars.
And you ended up building one car in California, the rest of them were in Italy.
All of them were built in Italy, yes. Yeah. They charged us, $3,500 a car for those cars, completely painted. So, we were really being ripped off.
So if we're keeping track, that Cadet was $1,000 to get a car with just a little bit more horsepower, so 3.5 times the price.
Absolutely one of the greatest, periods of my life was working with the Italians.
Yeah.
Just fantastic to work with.
So we know what happened with that car. We know what the story was with Le Mans. And then you're in Italy. You stay at this hotel in Modena.
So
and you
the
come back to your room
the only
and you get a
real
letter.
big hotel at that time.
You get a message.
Yeah, this is a little later after Carroll was running some cars called the King Cobras at that time, which were Cooper Monacos with the Cobra engines in them. And Di Tommaso, because of our arrangement doing some work over there, had convinced him that he could build a 7-liter version of the small block, and that we should build a sports racer to compete in what was going to become the Can-Am at that time. It hadn't become really Can-Am. It was still the United States Road Racing Championship. So they decided they would build 6 cars. So we got the first chassis. And
but hold on a minute here. You come back to your room.
Yeah. I mean, this is Carroll's way of saying,
put a body on this, I'll call you on the weekend.
Yeah, right. Have it done in a week, But
and this was the car.
So yeah, this is the car. It's a Di Tommaso car.
How much time did you spend in Italy working on this?
God, I can't remember. It was really a wonderful experience working with the Italians, and as you can see, the whole frame there. I love telling people about the way that they were built, because if you'd seen any of the photographs of the buck that we built for the aluminum Daytona, we'd sawed that all out with jigsaw, and then put it together like an ice cube. Well, the Italians didn't work that way, They got the chassis in there, and then Fantuzzi would say, Luigi, I want you to go down the street and get some metal, and we'll build the maquette for the body. So he gets on his bicycle and goes down to the local construction site and comes back with a roll of what they use for reinforcing steel in Italy. It's like capellini spaghetti. They just put it inside all the concrete. But it's beautiful stuff to work with. It's all linear, and they just work with a you know, an arc welder and just buzz it together wherever they want. If they don't like it, they just break it loose, form it again. So the Italians work very, very fast, and you know, we can build really quite beautiful bodies over there in no time at all. So it was wonderful working in Italy. Loved working with them.
And around that same time, actually, I want to step back here. So we talked about influence when we first got on stage, and we talked about how Miles worked with Gil Evans and Charlie Parker. You guys at Shelby, another thing you didn't know you had in those pictures, you had your list of people you worked with.
God, I've never
You had virtually every CEO. So Lee Iacocca's in there, Bob Lutz is in there, but did you know that Wilt Chamberlain is in there?
Yeah, I can
Bill
believe that.
Cosby's in there.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's listed down. Wilt Chamberlain, not a basketball player, he's a barbecue friend.
Yeah.
So he knew from the barbecue days of Shelby.
Yeah, yeah.
And all these people are segmented out whether they're in the Detroit world or whether they're in the barbecue world.
Right, yeah.
And this is, I mean, people, there's like 10 pages of this. And it's a who's who of not just the car world, but the people you worked with.
Yeah.
Every race car driver's in there.
And Shelby's was really kind of a celebrity spot, you know. He loved to have, you know, important people come down and show him around the shop or whatever on it. And that's sort of the way that he invented things. As he'd move along, he'd talk along in the shop and just make up stories. He'd go along, and the poor guys working on the cars down there would hear him talking about these things that we're going to do, and they're all looking at each other. And you know, if it went over well with the people, he'd come down and say, you know, we ought to do that. I mean, it was amazing working for Shelby.
So he and John Kennedy had something in common with the NASA guy.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
incredible, yeah.
I guess I just dated myself there. But then again, I wasn't alive when he said that, the whole NASA thing. Anyway, it works great at the Comedy Store.
Good.
We'll move on. What's this?
This is a Nethercutt Mirage, Jack Nethercutt, and the Nethercutt family. If you've ever been over to the Nethercutt Museum.
Stunning collection.
Sylmar, beautiful, beautiful museum, best collection of classic cars. And I think young Jack wanted to build his own.
Second to the Petersen, of course. Let's be very clear about
Okay,
this.
well,
Come on.
hang on.
Yeah. Well, we got the Chavarron's Bugatti downstairs.
All right, yeah.
So you worked on this, you designed this.
Jack wanted to build his own Can-Am car, and the problem was he was doing it privately, so it took way too long to get it built. His idea was to build a super lightweight Can-Am car, so it was built within.
He's got a hell of a shop over there. I mean, he could build anything at that shop up in Sylmar.
They could do anything on it, but the problem was Jack was sort of financing it out of his own pocket, which is fairly large. But the transition in racing moves so quickly that, you know, if you design something, you better have it done within a couple of months or it's going to be obsolete. Jack took about 2 years to build his car up, and by the time we got it built, the big 7-liter Chevys had come in, McLaren's first cars were coming in, and these real pretty cars, low-drag aerodynamic cars, were obsolete. We were already into downforce cars, so that car was obsolete before it was ever finished. But it was very advanced in thinking. Even the wheels were monocoque on it at that time, and it was one of the very first monocoque chassis and had a very pretty body on it. It was last of the pretty race cars, but not a very successful car.
So let's step back. Let's talk about racers here. You know, how many Shelby guys do we have in the room here? Like,
Yeah,
it's like
lots
all
of
on this, like a wedding. You got the groom on this side and the bride on this side. I got to ask, what was it like to work with Shelby?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
The thing is that there were always great promises from Shelby, as anybody could ever tell you around here. You know, he'd promise you one thing, but it never came around. I mean, I'd gone to work for Shelby hoping I could be a race driver, just like John Morton here. You know, we all thought we were going to be race drivers, but if another program came along that was bigger and better, that's what he switched off. And if you asked him about it, he'd just say just say it never happened. You know, so it was all smoke and mirrors working for Shelby. But he was the greatest salesman I think I've ever been around. I mean, he could walk into top management office any place in Detroit and talk to Lee Iacocca or Henry Ford or whoever it was and have those guys charmed in 15 minutes and convince them that, you know, you could win the world with it, and they'd pay him the money, and he'd come out, and with the crew that he'd put together, we had really probably the finest group of race car builders in the world at Shelby American. And it's interesting because when they all first came there, they did not even want to admit that they were working on sports cars. That was well below anything. They all wanted to go to Indianapolis. That was the thing that they thought was the top end. So they were either guys that were running streamliners out at the lakes or drag racing, but mainly Indianapolis. And they thought, you know, if we finally get this thing going, maybe Shelby will see the light and we'll go to Indy. Well, of course, that wasn't his goal. His goal was to go to Europe.
Go to Europe. And you did something in the completely opposite direction.
Well, that's pretty much...
literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was working at Shelby's in there.
What kind of car is that?
That's a Hino. You probably
Not a
have
truck.
never heard of a Hino because they only make trucks and buses today. But sort of as a little project in the evening, we hot rodded this little Japanese sedan, and a friend of mine named Bob Dunham had brought the car over and asked me to do some work on it. And
you were driving too.
What's that?
You were driving. You were finally saying, if I'm not
Yeah,
going to
well,
race
we got
with Shelby,
two
I'm
cars.
going to
I
race
agreed.
these.
The first car, I agreed that I'd build it and
Yeah.
crew him for the first year, and then when he went back to Japan, he gave me the car, and I ran it the second year.
Just a little bit different than the Daytona Coupe, huh?
Yeah. Well, you got to understand there was no sedan racing in the United States. The SCCA did not think that sedans were a valid form of road racing, so they would not have any sedan classes in American racing. Here in Southern California, the California Sports Car Club was a renegade region of the Sports Car Club of America, and the editor of Sports Car International at that time, W.R.C. Shedenhelm, realized that there were enough guys out there running to run little sedans. I mean, there were Mini Coopers, there were Cortinas, there were Saabs, guys with Hinos, or whatever. So we went to the Cal Club and said, if we can show up with 15 cars, would you give us a class to run? And we did. And so that was the beginning of sedan racing in the United States.
What were you racing against?
So we were racing against the, Mini Coopers. They were the most popular car, but you can see there's little Alfa Romeos there, there's Volvos or whatever. This is up at Reno, one of the very
So you
first
were at the
races.
forefront of this. You were early on in this racing.
Yep.
I mean, this is like DTM today.
Yeah,
Really?
I can remember it but what happened is that the biggest race in the country at that time was the Times Mirror Grand Prix out at Los Angeles. And they had to have a warm-up race out there. So they had a thing called the Mission Bell 100 or whatever it was. And rather than favor any particular sports car class, they decided they sort of have a hooligan race and invite all these guys out there with sedans to run. Well, the Japanese manufacturers at that time, who were all trying to come into the American market, had come over to see what big-time racing was. And this is really one of the richest races in the world at Riverside in the Times Mirror Grand Prix. So they sent all of their marketing people over to understand how Americans went racing. So they had this opening race down there, and there were really no rules for it, so we ended up building the biggest cheater motor we could for the thing, and went out and I won the race there. And when I pulled into Victory Circle there, I mean, it's almost solid Japanese with cameras taking pictures of this. And it was a huge, huge thing in Japan because this Japanese car that was at the bottom of the pecking order of manufacturers in Japan had won this major race in the United States. So it made all the headlines at Japan, and to make a long story short, I was invited over for the factory and had a great relationship working with Hino for 3 years.
And even though you were racing those Hinos, you still kept the Lotus in your blood, I'd like to point out. That shirt.
Say which?
You still kept the Lotus in your blood, that T-shirt there.
Oh, yeah.
Still wearing your Lotus colors.
Yep, absolutely.
Green and yellow all the way. Nice. There's your shop. And then you did some testing over in Japan.
Well, we'd convinced Mr. Miyako, was the controller there, had been trained as a banker in Japan and was an enthusiast, and explained, what they wanted to do and come into the American market. And they had this plan for this new beautiful little Contessa to design there. And I said, but what we should really plan on doing is we should be planning on going to Le Mans with a really GT coupe. And he said, oh, that's far beyond anything management could ever understand. I don't think you better tell them what you want to do on that. And I said, okay, whatever. He says, But he says, I think you ought to do it too. So he says, we'll figure enough money in the budget here for you to do it in secret. And then you build the 2 cars that we're supposed to build for him.
And you were saying, what about Carroll being a good salesman?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was the a little car we call the Samurai. Real pretty little car.
What was going on at the time when you were building this between Hino and a larger car manufacturer in Japan?
Well, the problem with Japanese cars at that time, that they were all built under license pretty much by English engines, which were long stroke, little pistons with lots of long stroke. And so the very first series of cars they brought over here, the Toyopets or whatever they were, they'd take them out on the freeways here and they just burn them up. So the Japanese were not very successful in their entry into the American market. But the one area that they were successful on is they were selling a lot of pickup trucks because there were so many Japanese gardeners over here. So the sale of pickup trucks became an important thing to anybody who could build enough pickup trucks. The largest builder of trucks and buses in Japan was Hino, so they had a pickup truck line. And Toyota wanted to take that line over, so changed it over to Toyota. So long story short, there was a hostile takeover, and they ended up taking over Hino, cutting off the car program completely, and ended up taking over their pickup truck line. And Hino's still building trucks and buses. Very good quality stuff in Japan, but they're now owned by Toyota.
Very large. So they came and basically took this car.
Yeah, this car kind of never got finished up because of that takeover, right?
What's the car next to it?
That car was the TR250K, which I designed for Kaz Kasner. At that time, Kasner had been running the Triumph competition department on the West Coast. Bob Tullius was running the Triumph competition department on the East Coast. And Al Holbert was running Porsches on the East Coast. Alan Johnson was running the factory-backed Porsches here on the West Coast. And we had another Porsche team running on the East Coast because the SECA is divided into regions. So the object was to win your region and have as many cars on the national grid as possible. So in looking ahead, we realized that even though we were competitors, Kaz realized that the Triumphs were not going to be able to compete up against the Datsuns or the Porsches or whatever. So we decided that we would build a prototype car using the existing chassis, which is working pretty good, but improving the aerodynamics on it, and show the management in Europe what could be done by putting a Americanized, better body on the car. So this car was built down at BRE in my shop.
Now, interesting.
And we followed very much the same format that we'd done in the Daytona Cobra. We took the existing chassis on it, we built a subframe over the top out of little space frame tubing to stiffen it up, and built a body on it, moved the engine back, I don't know, 8 or 9 inches. And it became a really nice car, and the object was that to take it down to Sebring in 67, I guess it was, and we would run against the factory Porsches down there and show the Triumph factory in England that they had a car that could still be competed with all the with the Porsches. Being a one-off car, it had to run in the prototype class, so it was not competing directly against them, but our thing was to show that if we had a way to go. So the fact is the car was really, really fast. We were leading the race, but we had a wheel brake on it. We didn't have enough money to have our own wheels done, so we had bought some Chaparral Mark I wheels that had been done by Troutman Barnes. We had to lighten them up so that they'd clear, and they had a weakness in them, and we broke a wheel and took off the suspension, so the car didn't finish the race, but it was really fast when it was running.
Little known story. There's a lot of misconceptions around Toyotas at the time, especially the 2000 GTs, which are now $800,000 million cars.
Yeah.
There's a story that few of us know about those cars.
Well, with the success of the program that it had with Hino, I didn't know it until I had a knock on the door one day and look outside, and there's a Japanese gentleman out there, and I went to the door and said yes. And his name was Mr. Miki. And I said, yeah, can I help you? And he explained that Toyota was in the middle of taking over Hino, and that he had understood that, you know, we were building some race cars for Hino, and that he wanted to come in and take inventory and give a report to Toyota. And I said, well, I can't let you in until I hear from the factory. So, long story short, he comes back the next day with a letter of approval or whatever. And I'd called my friend in Japan. He said, yeah, you better let him in. Looks like they're going to take over. So he comes in and he sees both the cars, everything's right on. And here's this car that's being built off the budget. This is a Samurai. And his eyes very large. And he said, what's this? And I said, well, that's the Samurai that we're going to take over the car. And I said, well, it's not for sale. You know, all the rest of the stuff belongs to Hino, but that car is not for sale. How much do you want for it? And I said, it's not for sale. We're going to Japan with it. I didn't know all this until a couple of years later, but they were in the middle of trying to buy Hino and keep the stocks depressed, price down as low as possible. If we'd showed up in Japan with probably the most modern looking race car that anybody had ever seen in Japan, it would have looked like Hino was leading the world in terms of automotive development, and the price would have gone right up. So it was up to them to make sure that the car did not appear over there and didn't get any publicity. So it was his job to make sure that nothing happened on it. So what happens is that at the same time, what's going on is Shelby had won Le Mans in 1967. He was at the peak of his career. The whole Ford program, the whole operation they had out here at the airport was huge. Ford had cut the program off, so Shelby had gone to his accountant, a guy named Barry Galloway, and said, what are we going to do with all this money and these teams that we got working here? And Barry, being a very astute guy, said, you know, what you should do is buy a Toyota dealership. And Shelby, is that a good thing? And Barry
Ford
said,
guy asked if he wants to buy a Japanese car dealership.
Yeah, he said, yeah, that's a good thing to do. So he said, we'll go down 190th Street and buy one. We'll set up a dealership here in El Segundo. So Barry goes down to 190th Street and says they want to put in the Shelby dealership down there. And while he's down there, of course, they're pretty interested. You know, the Shelby's interested in this whole program. And they said, well, we have this other distributorship area that nobody has yet bought, which covers the whole west coast of Florida, all the way through the Gulf states, all the way through Texas and everything. And would you be interested in that? And Barry says, well, I'll talk to Mr. Shelby about it. He's from Texas. He'd probably be interested. Yes, so he goes back to Shelby, and Barry says, you know, there's an incredible opportunity here to buy the whole southern United States distributorships for Toyota. And Shelby says, is that a good deal? And he says, yes, it's a good deal. He says, well, go do it. And he says, well, you got to go down there and sign it because they want to meet you and whatever. So he goes down there, and as a result of my work with the Samurai project or whatever, the Japanese had given me the contract to come up with this, racing their new sports car, a thing called the Toyota 2000 GT. Well, when Shelby gets down there, of course, he asks them, he said, you know, have you guys ever thought about going racing? And of course, they said, well, oh yes, we've just signed a contract with Pete Brock to run our new 2000 GT. And, oh, hell, he's just the guy that changed his tires for me, you know. And of course, you know, he is, I mean, Shelby's on all the headlines. They've won Le Mans. He's at absolute, the peak of his, you know, whole racing career. And the bottom one was they didn't have any confidence in the car they had, which is at that time the 2000 Roadsters. And so I went back and I'll tell you, I called Mr. Miyako again, the guy that was the controller, Hino guy, and I called him and I explained what had happened. And he said, well, give me a couple of days. Let's see if I can maybe solve that problem for you. So he calls back in a couple of days and he says, not to worry. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I said, you don't even know if you've got a job with Hino or not. Or he says, you're going to have the money and you're going to have the cars. And I said, how did you do that? He says, well, I had lunch with an old school friend of mine. I said, well, who is it? And he explained that his old school friend, they'd gone to the University of Tokyo together, which is the Harvard Business School of Tokyo, was the chairman of the board of Nissan Motor Corporation. Told him the story that I'd worked with him for 3 years and really straight guys to work with. And he said, well, that sounds like a good idea. So unbeknownst to any of the people here in the United States, they made arrangements to send me 2 cars, a bag of money to run the cars the first year. And we ended up with our career with Frank Moniz the first year and John Morton the second year running these little 2000 Roadsters. And that's the team with John sitting in the car, and that was really the kickoff to BRE and the beginning of our success as a team. And again, we had, some pretty interesting. The guy on the right there is Mac Tilton, of all our, Tilton products. This is Mr. Katayama. After the first couple of races, finally, people at Nissan had to realize they better introduce me to him. And from that point on, I didn't have to go through all management to get approval for anything. I just pick up the phone and call Mr. Katayama, whether it was right or wrong. And we got along famously. A wonderful, wonderful guy.
So much so that you started doing more stuff with them. The program got bigger, shop got bigger.
I don't know if the shop got bigger, but we got a little bit more money to play with. And
you're not supposed to tell us that. You're supposed to say the shop got bigger.
Okay, all right, shop got bigger, all right. We started, of course, we started in the Roadsters, and we're very successful with those. And shorten up the story, the first thing that, I went down to Nissan after we started being successful, and they showed me the picture of the 240Z. And I knew that, we finally had something really competitive to run. And all the development work that we did on the L-Series engine for the 240Z made the car lead into the 510s because it's basically the same size engine. But we won the national championship with John Morton for 2 years.
And who is this person in this picture?
What's that?
Who's the person in the picture?
That's John Morton.
John Morton.
Yeah, you can't recognize him because his hair hasn't been dyed white yet.
It's funny you say that. That's John Morton.
Yeah.
Because we have John Morton sitting right there.
Yeah.
John, come and join us for a minute. Welcome, sir. Come on up here. Join us for a bit.
Hey, John, you should sit up here because I should sit at your feet. I want you to sit right.
And you know what? That is who Peter is right there. Most humble guy you'll ever meet. So John, we talked a little bit on the phone, and actually we've met before.
Yeah, we did.
When we met Randy. Where's Randy?
Right there.
Randy,
Yeah.
Randy, stand up for us.
Yeah.
Come on, Randy. Come here, Randy. So a little before and after here. So here's the guy designing Corvettes and Shelbys and all this kind of stuff, and then here's the guy influenced today. What car did you design?
370Z.
370. Yep.
Oh, that car's sitting out there.
Yep.
So we've heard him talk a lot. Do you have any embarrassing stories of him you could share with us?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he said you dye your hair white.
I'm not gonna share the embarrassing ones. Maybe one a little bit. Peter, you haven't talked about off-road racing yet.
Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Oh, we're getting there.
Well, I can give you a preview.
Oh, I'd love that.
I think it was Peter's always his favorite type of racing till one of them almost killed him. And I don't know how he feels about it now, but I think he still likes it.
Still is, yeah.
When I went to work there, it was actually the first year I was the second driver.
How old were you back then? I mean, you look like you're 3 in some of these pictures.
I think I was 26.
26,
Or
wow.
7.
Yeah.
27 when I started with Peter. And I was doing well in the Roadster. And Peter had 3 cars. I think they were East African Safari.
They're
510s.
factory-built East African Safari cars, yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm his driver. I should get to drive one of them because
Yeah.
they had 3 of them entered. And I said, I want to drive in the Baja. The other driver, Frank Moniz, I don't think he had much interest in it. And I didn't know much about off-road racing, but I said I'd like to drive in the race, and he said, you can't drive in the race. And I said, why not? You've got so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and John Woodner. And he said, well, because if you get hurt, you can't run the runoffs. And we'd qualified both cars for the runoffs at Daytona. And I said, well, Woodner qualified for the runoffs too. And he said, yeah, but he drives for Huffaker, and then Huffaker's So about, I think 3 years later, it was really at the end, pretty much the end, we had won 2 Trans Am championships. And Peter was going to run the Baja again, and this time I was going to get to drive with him.
Right.
And this was the Sugar Daddy car. We had Sugar Daddy sponsorship. That's Nabisco. And they thought it was a really good idea if they gave me, Peter was going to start the race. I'd never been south of Ensenada. Peter was going to start the race, and I was the passenger, and then we were going to take turns driving. This year it started in Mexicali, which was where it usually started in Ensenada. So as a promotion, I had a box of Nabisco Sugar Daddies. And as we got toward the ramp, they go off at about a minute interval. And we were back quite a way, and I was supposed to hand out the Sugar Daddy suckers to the Mexican kids. And I thought, well, that's a pretty civic thing to do, but these little maggots started, they were virtually coming in the car after the suckers. So I had to throw the whole box out. The race started, and, I've been in a lot of memorable races with Peter, but this one is the most memorable of all. We got on the first, about 100 miles, I think, was paved that year. And the first unusual thing that happened, Peter was driving, is these 4 or 5 guys in a Volvo are just parked in the middle of nowhere. Right. We're on a lonely Mexican road, and we hadn't encountered any of the competitors yet. And just as we caught them, they all turned around and mooned us.
Those crazy Swedes.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. We got to Camaloo, and that's when we switched from Peter driving to me driving. And I got to tell you one thing, he's the worst backseat driver you've ever After a half an hour of my driving, he'd say, hey, you missed a bump back there.
I got to ask you guys a question. I've seen, we all kind of know Datsun 510s, we know 240s, I know you know plenty of 240s. What is this?
That's I
know
what it is.
That's the funniest looking Datsun I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Another car that never really got quite finished, but that was the first sort of single-seat off-road race car that I designed, pretty much with Z-car suspension all the way around. And again, because the program with Nissan got cut off, it got never finished up. I think it would have been a great car. It was really one of the first really advanced buggies.
Yeah. And then here's some of the rest of your cars here.
So that's the Sugar Daddy car there.
Yeah.
That's John sitting in the seat, me behind it. Yeah.
And some of you guys driving here. Look at that. And there's even a Rally 240.
Later we tried to run a 240Z down there, but it didn't turn out to be a really great rally car. The hood was so long that if you come up over a hill, you couldn't see which way the road was going to go. By the time you got to the top of it, you had to slow down too much. And the 510 was a great race car because you could run right up the top and look over where you're going to go. And in Baja, you have no idea what's going to happen to the road. You may get over the top and the road will switch and turn 2 or 3 different roads, and you have to pick which one you're going to go, because the standard thing in Mexico is if the road's bad, people just move over in a few yards and run parallel to that one. And then over the years, there may be 4 or 5 different roads out there. And some are good and some aren't. And the silt down there is so deep that if you get buried in it, it's going to be hours getting out of there. So you've got to make the decision to read the road and pick the right one. That's why it's such a challenge to drive down there. It's really wonderful racing.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you coming to tell us a couple of stories.
We did finish the race.
Yeah.
We had a lot of trouble. We got lost, we got stuck, but we did finish, and it was one of the most exciting races I've ever been in. Yeah. Thanks to Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
So now, I think you need to turn your 370 into a rally car, and you and I go do some rally.
Yeah.
Okay?
No, I'm just completely inspired by it. I feel like I'm not doing enough now. I need to go racing.
So.
Yeah, not doing enough.
I'm just in awe of.
How you doing, Randy?
Good to see you.
Randy actually got the, big round of applause for Randy. Well, what is it? A couple of years ago, you gave Randy a ride at ZCon in Nashville.
Really? That back? Wow.
Yeah, I know. He looks like he's 10 years old, but he's been
Yeah.
designing cars for about 10 years. And you're going to see a couple of more cars of his coming up very shortly.
Great.
If you guys have seen the Infinity Essence concept, that's the man right there. Right there.
Excellent.
Oh, Emerge, I'm sorry. The Essence, I'm thinking the wrong car.
Yeah.
Yes. And then next to him is his boss, Taro, who runs the Nissan Design America studio. Why don't you stand up, Taro?
Yeah.
Talk about inspirations. Taro, have you ever seen inside of an Infiniti or a Nissan the way you control the navigation system and all the interaction? This is the man that came up with that entire system.
Fabulous.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Talk about inspirations here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think what's interesting here is, so you're becoming big time at this point, Peter. You've worked with George Lucas. You've worked with the Rockford Files. You've worked with Carroll Shelby.
Yeah.
You've done barbecue with Wilt Chamberlain.
Occasionally, yeah.
So what does a guy with those accomplishments, what does he next do? And the answer is not go to Disneyland.
Went flying.
No. You do an ad for Playboy.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Didn't think I found that.
Oh, my God. This was absolutely the most hilarious story.
This is great.
I mean, this is a whole series of ads that Playboy used to do called What Kind of Man Reads Playboy? And so they came to us and said they wanted to use the car in the background. So here's the whole crew in the background there. You know, we're just the backstop for it. So they came out with this guy, and they've got this guy, really cool-looking guy in the suit and the whole thing, and they get the lighting and move it around. It takes them all day to shoot it, but to make sure that he's really looking as cool as possible, they've got the person that runs around and pulls his coat back and puts little clothespins on the back so that it's perfectly, the suit is perfectly fitted. And he must have had, 7 clothespins for each shot. They'd move around and get it done. So finally, when the ad comes out, you can see that he's sitting there. He's got 7 clothespins holding his jacket. How that shot ever got through all of the people it has to move through with all the clothespins showing, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
And then you became such a big man. You got your parts operation. You even went small, too.
We began making,
Model cars.
production parts, and
This is how I got to know you.
always gotten very interested in doing model cars. I've always been interested in models, so worked with Revell and Kyosho and Ebro in making, model cars.
I built one of those.
Yeah.
Dating myself, but I built one
Okay.
of those. So you had a bit of a guest driver program as well? You had some other
Well,
guys?
our guest program was really interesting. There's Sam Posey there. That's Dan Gurney. Dan never drove the guest car, but he drove the pace car that we made for the Ontario Speedway.
And that was Mr. K with him in that
Mr.
picture
K,
we had a
yep,
while
right.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then little known car that you guys built and John drove.
Well, this was our biggest project to going. This is the stainless steel Carrot. And of course, all the guys that we had in the shop wanted to go real car racing, and of course I wanted to as much as possible. And we got a chance to buy a great Lotus 70B chassis, and this is going to be John's big break for us all to go racing.
Big theme for you with these Lotus.
What's that?
It's a big theme for you, this Lotus thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd driven Lotuses in it, and so I took all the resources I had to buy the car and put it together, and we put John in, and he was, as usual, just as fast right off the bat as possible, for a brand new car, and some incredible work went into it, and through an absolute freak rainstorm down in Atlanta, the car was destroyed, and that was the end of our racing. And I don't think anybody's ever been as angry as me as the whole crew was, because, hey, why don't we just fix the car and go racing? I was broke and couldn't do it, and we couldn't go any farther. So kind of our big chance went away to go racing at that time.
And that brings up a big point. You know, so you got Carroll, great salesman, and did the distributorship, which actually, interesting story with that, that was its own distributorship up until recently. Someone owned that whole region, which Toyota, and no one ever does that now. Business.
Well,
what's your philosophy
Carroll
on business?
had gotten this distributorship for Toyota, and of course they failed miserably on the Toyota 2000 GT program, thanks to us. And but it was really funny because he got a call from somebody in Detroit. Said, hey, you better sell that Toyota dealership. I need you back here at Chrysler.
That guy was on the list.
Said, I got a plan. We're gonna do some stuff with Chrysler's new project, new sports car, and so Shelby had to sell his Toyota dealership, and he called up Tommy Friedkin, a friend of his who owned Pacific Southwest Airways at that time, and millionaire type guy, and said, you can have the entire thing for what I've got in it. Wasn't very much at that time. Oh, maybe, $250,000 or so.
Oh.
So the bottom line is that Friedkin made millions and millions of dollars out of his distributorship for Toyota cars, and he'd send Shelby a Christmas card every year with several $1,000s in it. I think that pissed off Shelby more than anything else. It's the one thing he really failed at.
But I think one of the big things that you did differently, Shelby went and got other people's money. You put your own money into this stuff.
Yep.
Where did that come from?
Mainly from the sponsors and stuff that we had. Our budget out of Nissan really wasn't too large. We were able to get very good support from Goodyear, and we got a lot of product sponsorship, for things like oil and spark plugs and all the rest of it. But it was all little bits from other sponsors that we had. You could see the names on the side of the car.
But it sounds like you were a guy that, talk about believe in yourself and invest in yourself.
Well, that's the only way you're going to go with it. If you get into a race program, you can't go halfway. You've got to go as far as you can on it. And if it works out, you're a hero, and if you don't, you're not. If you've got a huge budget and you're working with a large manufacturer that's got sort of unlimited funds behind you, you can make great risks, and it's no loss to yourself. But if you want to try to do it on your own, it's if you fail, you fail big.
Would you have gone a different direction after Nissan?
No, there's the thing about working with people in racing is that I've always admired people in racing, because there are always people that are striving to be their best, and you can't get a better group of guys than that.
That's for damn certain. A big round of applause for the guys that worked with Peter. Big round of applause. John. Now, talking about investing in yourself and trying a different direction, you definitely went in a different direction, my friend.
So I got very interested in flying and started building hang gliders.
Now, how does one just turn up and say, yeah, I want to go hang gliding?
Well, it's interesting. Our shop was down in El Segundo, and driving down the coast highway there one day, I looked out there, and if any of you, of course, have been to LAX, there's a huge power station off to the side of there. Well, when they built that power station, they had to excavate the beach area out underneath it to build a foundation for that power station. As a result, they built this huge, huge sand dune right there on the beach. And this is the 60s. And that was really the birth of hang gliding. It all started, there were a bunch of hippies out there flying out there with bamboo gliders. They called them bamboo bombers at that time. You just, put these bamboo gliders together, and then the wings were made out of visqueen. And they, fly off of this thing. So I'm driving down the road there and looked up, and it looked like a lot of fun. So I stopped and walked up to the top of the hill and watched these guys flying off down. And, being the great open sport that it was, this guy panting hauls this glider back up to the top of the hill, and he's so tired he can't get this glider to fly down again. He said, "You want to try this?" And I said, "Sure, you know, why not, you know?" So the glide ratio on a hang glider at that time just about matched the size of the sand dune. So even if you were flying 100 yards in glide, you were never really more than about 8-10 feet off the sand. So if anything broke or crashed or whatever, you know, you just fall down in the sand, you're not going to get bad. So anyway, he explains the whole thing to me about how you fly this hang glider. I run off down the hill, and I made this incredible flight down there, you know, 100 yards or so. And it was the most thrilling thing I'd ever done. I thought, God, this is really a cool thing. So I hauled the glider back up all the top and looked over the glider real closely, and I said, you know, are there any plans or anything to build these things? No, we just build them on our own. So a guy named Francis Regallo, who had actually come up with the idea for the original hang glider, had built them sort of as a guided parachute to bring missile satellites back in. And that's where the whole design came from. So I thought, well, God, there's a great opportunity here. I mean, it wouldn't take very much, you know, special hardware to make these gliders a lot safer. So I went back and designed these little tangs and, you know, collected all these little turnbuckles and got wire crimping stuff on how to make the hang glider kit, you know, and took this down to the beach to show it to all the hippies down there. And God, they were all really enthused about it because, you know, it showed how everything, these gliders could be really safe, and we replaced the aluminum, you know, the bamboo with aluminum tubing, and they were all very, very excited about it. You know, I said, well, you know, here's this little kit. You can build a hang glider. Well, how much is it? I said, oh, I think it was about $5 or $6 or something for all these little parts. $5 or $6? Boy, what a ripoff! You know, they all walked off. So I was in the hang glider business. You know, I just said, well, I got all this stuff built. I'll start building hang gliders. And so we went in, and the bottom line was we turned out to be the largest hang glider manufacturer in the world in a few years. And we went from, you know, flying off these little sand dunes down there in El Segundo, progressed to flying out here in Silmar, and then going out bigger mountains, and finally going up the Owens Valley. And we were flying distances of, you know, 300 miles and gaining altitude up to 15 to 17,000 feet, flying on oxygen with these little gliders. We literally reinvented the airplane in a whole new sport, and it was probably one of the most interesting, exciting areas of my life. And it showed that you could, you know, start a whole business and get a whole new thing going for nothing. But the thing that really put us out of business with product liability is that there's no way to protect yourself if you come up with anything that's even perceived as dangerous.
How long were you in this business?
Probably about 5 years or something like that.
How much time had elapsed from Datsun to up?
They overlapped a little bit.
A little bit,
you know.
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, you had a personal incident.
What's that?
You had a personal incident.
Yeah.
With the hang gliders.
Yeah, I lost my son flying hang gliders.
And ultimately, you kind of changed, kind of got you out of the business, and you
didn't want to
decided
change.
on.
In fact, I stayed with it because the things that we found out that were unsafe about gliders, that, you know, decided to stay in. Got a young new designer that was working for me, another guy that just developed a lot of ideas on his own how to make hang gliding safer. At that time, if a glider went into a dive, you couldn't get it out because the amount of airflow over the sail had increased to the point that there was so much pressure on the back of the sail, the glider would go in and kill you. So this young designer and I figured out a way to make the gliders safe so that if it got to a certain speed, it would pull out. And that changed the whole development of hang glider design. And with that design of that hang glider, we completely changed the industry over. Changed the wing tips on them so that they wouldn't go into a full lift dive. And then we invented a method of the crossbar moving abroad, because weight shift is the only way you can control a hang glider. You have to fly it, you're shifting your weight around. And to get a higher aspect ratio and bigger wings, you have to be able to shift more weight. So we finally figured out how to make the crossbar move in relationship to your weight. And with that, we were able to, make these gliders that, instead of just flying off the top of the mountains that we were doing out in Elsinore or whatever, we could finally get into thermals and start thermaling and climbing. And as they say, we were flying up as high as 17,000 feet. And that's
Wow.
a real thrill in a hang glider.
That's about the limit,
Yeah, it really is. It sounds like, you're high, but really when you're up in the air, you have absolutely no relationship to the ground. You have such great sensitivity in flying, and you can feel the pressure, in your shoulder straps, because when you're flying under the glider, you fly into a thermal, and all of a sudden you can feel that thermal coming up, and you turn into it. And by then we got little instruments called variometers that showed your rate of climb. And these are so sensitive that if you move the instrument up or down even 1 inch, it shows whether you're rising or falling. So with this instrument in a hang glider, you're flying along and you start to get into some lift. The variometer begins to indicate that you've got some lift and you know to turn and stay in the thermal. And you can get out there and fly, and pretty soon you're out there flying along, and there's hawks out there flying with you. And you just keep climbing and climbing and climbing, and there's just no relationship to what's going on underneath in terms of the earth.
So you're hanging out with hawks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and not Hudsons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really a beautiful sport.
And you went and did a couple of things after that.
Well, we won the world's cross-country championship 6 out of 7 years with it, and invented the first 3-axis controlled sailplane that was foot-launched. And that was really about the high point of it, and then the product liability thing put us out of business.
You went back to Art Center. But
What's that?
You went back to Art Center, but
Yes.
not as a student.
Yep.
Yeah, and so did your work.
So, well, it was time to, do a book sort of on what happened all the whole period of Shelby. And so I spent a couple years, writing a book on our adventures at Shelby and how the Daytona Cobra came about. And was also offered a job to teach up at Art Center, teaching automotive design, which I really enjoyed doing. I still think it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've had a chance to do is, work with the young guys.
Talk about rewarding. This is your car on the lawn
Yeah,
at their classic next to a Cord.
yeah.
I mean, that's really coming full circle.
Well, we won, several awards with the car on it, but
And this car recently just got something bestowed on it, didn't it?
that's 2601. I think
Or your
No,
car.
that's 2299.
Yeah, not the exact number, but
Yeah.
you know,
I'm trying to remember.
with the Historical Vehicle Association.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's happened here with the Historical Vehicle Association here in the United States is a division of the U.S. Department of Interior, where they've decided in the past to recognize all the historic sites in the United States, like the Golden Gate Bridge, the Statue of Liberty, or famous buildings like the Empire State or something. They decided the same thing with automobiles. So they decided to establish a list of the 100 most important automobiles in the United States. And the first car that they made the award to was the Daytona Cobra. So that was pretty neat. Well, it was a great recognition because it really was the only car that was really built at Shelby Americans. Everything else sort of came in and was prepared, but that was the one car that was built there, and truly an American car, and pretty proud of that, and that it got recognized at that level. And it's gotten a lot of coverage here in the press in the last couple of weeks.
So maybe
very, very
maybe this bum design thing will turn around for you. What do you think?
Yeah, it turned out to be a pretty good gig. Yeah, I love doing it. Yeah.
But that's not the only gig. How about photojournalism?
Yeah.
Talk about Renaissance, man. I mean, look at what this guy does.
Well,
Who took this picture?
that's Gail, my wife Gail.
No.
Oh, is
who
that
took
my
this
shot?
picture?
Oh, this is my
These
shot
are all
here.
your pictures.
Yeah. All right. Oh,
Not
gosh,
exactly
there's
Will
one somewhere up
Chamberlain.
on Pikes Peak, yeah. No, Gail and I have covered motorsports.
And not
this is
just
down
motorsports,
in
down in Peru.
Yeah. Covered
And the
motorsports
comedian's
for several
back.
years. The land speed record out at Black Rock Desert.
Yeah.
Guy, that's a car breaking the sound barrier behind us.
Yeah.
And,
What I thought was very interesting, now we've learned a lot from Peter today. We've learned about design, we've learned about racing, we've learned about salesmanship, we've learned about how to hang out with stars, barbecue, all sorts of things. But I didn't know, I'd learned from you what makes a happy marriage.
First, you got to have a good lady, you know.
Yeah, well, number one, you need a neat lady, which I think we need. She needs to come up here. Gail, come on up, Gail. Come on up. Let's give you a little hug here. Okay, so I have to tell you guys that none of this would be possible without Gail, and at the end of the day, really, he reports to her. But what's interesting about a happy marriage, it's not doing things together as most people think. It's not cooking together or sleeping in separate beds or sleeping in the same beds. It's making sure you have his and hers Cobra Daytona Coupe. This one is his. The one we have on display here is
Mine.
yes. And
Yeah.
how did you meet Peter?
Oh my gosh, I bought him.
I'm easy, you know.
I got out the
At a
checkbook.
Shelby meet, it was like a fundraiser thing?
Yeah. No, I actually hired him to come talk to Shelby American Club up in Washington
Wow.
State. So,
They always said when women like you, they definitely let you know.
yeah.
No women are hiring me, though. I got to work on
I'm
that.
so sorry, George.
Well, thank you for everything. I really
Oh, you
appreciate it.
bet. My pleasure.
Oh, I didn't even show the picture of the car. That's his car.
That's his car.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to point out another special lady in the audience. And Peter mentioned our hero, Davey McDonald.
Yes, yes.
Who just recently got inducted into the Corvette Hall of Fame, correct? And Sherry McDonald is here with their handsome son, Rich. So-
Sherry, you want to come up?
Yeah.
Come on up, Sherry. So you can see Sherry there. And then, sir, you know, this guy collects awards like other people collect stamps, which is entirely annoying. You wrote this book
Yes.
here. What happened in this spot where you're sitting right now about 2 months ago?
Geez, that's so far back I can't remember.
Yeah, because you're traipsing across the country for the Historical Vehicles Association, go to the Tokyo Motor Show to see the IDXs.
It won the Dean Batchelor Award as the top motorsport books of the year, and that was a real honor.
Dean Batchelor Award, just so you guys know, is the annual
the
award for
epitome
the
of-
Motor Press Guild, which is the largest association of automotive journalists.
Yep.
Big round of applause for that.
Again, it's just a story of working with remarkable people. In this case, working with Bill Mitchell, who is an heir apparent for GM Design, and Zora Duntov, and Ed Cole, and Harley Earl, and to do this car, which eventually became the production Stingray. And just the opportunity to work with the top guys in the business was really something else. And it's the car that's the one car that they've kept at General Motors styling
As an icon.
an icon.
True icon.
They keep it there, you know, saying this is the type of thing that we want to can do it. So the crew that built the C7 now is, you know, sort of use that as a benchmark to work from. And of course, all the good ideas that Zora Duntov wanted to put in there that he couldn't do when Mitchell was there have all gone into this car, and all the things that we learned about racing that were not accepted at that time are now all become part of the car. So it's really a remarkably fine automobile, and I don't think there's anything that's produced in the world anywhere, especially for the dollar, that will equal it. So it's pretty impressive that we've come this far from a car that was almost wiped out because it was unsuccessful. Pretty neat.
Tom Peters, who is the design director of this
Yep.
car here and the Camaro, tells a very interesting story. They didn't know that this car was going to be called a Stingray when they first set out to do the C7. And they went and looked at Peters' design, the 63 car, and said, what can we take that shows that maybe not the round taillights, maybe not the same fish-type elements, but what can we say where someone looks at it and says, that's a Stingray? And so they put in the canopy. They put in the dual elements here. They put in the box for the exhaust. And then Tom Peters, who I have to sadly say he drives boring cars. He does not drive a Corvette.
Yeah.
He took it out when the car was just released. He went for a drive in his neighborhood, and like 5, maybe teenagers run out. They don't say Corvette. They went Stingray.
Yeah.
And he said, we nailed it at that point. Yeah. Design director of the current Corvette. So how did we start the day? With influence from Harley Earl or Gil Evans and Charlie Parker.
Right.
I'm not, well, actually, Tom Peters and Quincy Jones are both bald.
Yeah.
So we'll call them the Quincy Jones of today, courtesy of this man.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, all these things have just been a chance to work with great people. Yeah.
I think everybody, including John here, would say the honor is to work with you, sir. Truly has been my honor getting to know you and working with you. Really an honor.
Good. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, kids, now we're going to move over into some Q&A from you guys. Let's start with the Ray Seidel. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. The 62 and 63 Corvette rear deck looks very much the same. Why no trunk lid on the 63?
Well, again, everything gets back to General Motors is cost. If you ask any, there's a famous saying from management at General Motors, we don't build automobiles at General Motors, we make money. So whenever they can cut back on the cost of anything they do, and that's probably why there's no trunk in it.
Okay. Jim Mahal asks, what concepts stick out to you the most? Concept cars.
What concept cars? You mean of overall? Oh, you have to go by era. I mean, I think mostly the early Italian stuff is still absolutely the most beautiful cars. A lot of the early French stuff is, fantastic. But I think that a lot of the aerodynamic stuff that Costin did is another area. So you just, you can pick 1 or 2 cars in each one of those eras, like whether it be a 2900 8C Alfa Romeo, roadster, a Turin body. I mean, it's just, they don't get any better than that. IDX. Boy, I'll tell you, that's going to be a real game changer for Nissan. I think it's going to be as important as the 240Z was.
Go back to that. So, question here related to what we talked about from Fel Batista. When did you know the roof was right on the coupe? How did you know when the roof was right on the coupe?
I guess when you run the car, you have an idea about what something's going to work. And, it's not very hard to figure out. You look at, guys have been designing airplanes for a long time. You look at roof lines on airplanes. They aren't designed like Ferrari roof lines. They all go down in the front. So obviously somebody's figured out a long time ago, sometime in the early 1900s, that, roof lines should have a real, gradual slope up from the windscreen on it. So that's just you look around there, there's all that information that's out there. All you have to do is apply it. It may look odd compared to what everybody else is doing, but if you just say, well, that's a good idea, it's easy to apply it.
Interesting question here. I'm surprised I didn't think to ask this. Did the Stingray influence at all the Daytona?
No.
Okay, simple enough. There's your answer. Don Johnson, there's your answer.
I mean, the Stingray is Bill Mitchell's car, and as much as I tried to get him to change some of the lines on the car, and I think it would have even been better looking than it is now, but it's a fabulous looking car, but the nose was too high and the back end was too low, and consequently is aerodynamically unstable. If we just shifted those lines like my original sketch, the car would have been a much, much better automobile, and I'd love to have had control of that car, but I'm working for somebody else, and they're determining, as he said when he came over and he put his arm around me, and I'd been trying to tell him something. He says, son, He says, I want you to know that I designed the Corvettes around here. Now just do what I tell you. So that's the way it is, you know.
Here's an interesting question from Rich McDonald.
Yes.
Rich asks, what's your favorite out of the cars you've built? What's your favorite?
Whatever the next one's going to be is always the favorite.
Ah, come on.
No, they're all.
That's the typical designer answer.
Yeah. No, they're all so exciting when you're working on them. You know, once you get it done, I always look back and see all the compromises you had to make, you know, whatever it was, whether cost or whoever you had to work with or whoever had control over the project or whatever. I think the ones that I've enjoyed working on the most are the ones that I've pretty much done by myself in terms of with the aesthetic parts of it. And the Daytona certainly fits in there. Yeah.
While we're on the subject of Daytona, and being that you're such a Hollywood kind of a guy, Tim Reeve has a question for you.
Okay.
Has anybody approached you to be part of a story for a movie about the whole development, especially the race in Europe with that car?
There have been several attempts to make films on the Shelby story, and it was very interesting, especially working for Shelby, because I knew about 3 or 4 scripts that started and was actually interviewed by the writers and stuff that worked on them, and they really got into writing the scripts. I got to see some of them. Some were very, very good. One was written by George Levy, who at that time was the editor of Auto Week. But Shelby was such a complex character, not always in a very positive light, that when the scripts finally got done, he looked at it and the pictures never got done. And, you know, maybe now that he's gone, somebody will do that film and will show both sides of what a complex character he was and why he was successful.
Why don't you call your buddy George Lucas, see if you guys make a film together?
George Lucas would be an ideal guy to do it, I think.
Yeah.
Because he has a great interest in that history.
Is he a car
He has
guy?
his calendar of pictures out the front is such that if he even mentioned doing something like that, he's doing so much other stuff, he's not even interested, because I don't think he knows from the business in Hollywood that automobile pictures have never been really that great, and always the great pictures are, you know, something that has nothing
Well,
to
up
do with
until
Hollywood.
Rush. Rush is an amazing film.
Yeah.
So you could be like Rush Part 2.
Oh, great film, but, you know, is it ever going to be a blockbuster? No.
I think, well, we'll call it Rush Part 2, the David versus Goliath era. The life and times of Peter Brock.
Well, I know
Come on, man, let's go sell it.
There are
CBS,
people out
just up
there
the street.
that have got some beautiful scripts out there, and I'd love to see them if they can get the money behind them. I think it's a great, great story.
Yeah.
And again, it'll be a story about the team, not just about the race or Shelby, whatever.
Michael Holmes has a very interesting question, and it brings up a point we didn't cover. What non-automotive influences have you had, if any? And I think you should answer that question by showing everybody your wrist.
No. I just happen to love primitive art. And it's again because you look at what people have an aesthetic taste for doing things, and primitive art is such that, you know, there's no formal training on it, and yet their desire to create something beautiful is so powerful that they'll overcome whatever to do it.
I want to say something here, a little aside here. So I live in a very, he talks about hippies. I live in a hippie community called Venice. And my neighbors, I love them dearly, but they're not car guys, okay? Some of them are into music. We're a very unique group of people. One of them, who I had never spoken of this man ever to my neighbor Phil, and Phil is a huge dealer in Indian art. So Phil came down the canal one day, and he's like, hey, you know, I see you got this car here, and I tell him what's going on. And he says, you know, I know one of your guys. He's really huge into Indian art. His name is Peter Brock. Yeah. And I haven't even said a word to him about you. Yeah. You're famous everywhere.
Yeah. It's fabulous art, you know.
It is, really is. Yeah, as a proud Arizona State alum, I can say that. This is an interesting question, and I think that if you can answer this and fulfill this request, the person that gives you the money should make a donation to the Petersen.
Really?
Yes. Marshall Buck would like to know if there is a BRE 240Z available for purchase.
Boy, there's only one of those cars that exists anymore, and it's owned back in Indiana. I guess anything's for sale if you want, you know. But unfortunately, the original car, which John drove, was given back to Nissan and immediately turned over to another competitive driver who totaled the car out and destroyed it. And that was the end of it. So only the second car remains, and it's back in Indianapolis. The guy runs it still in vintage events and cleans up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Taro and Randy, you've got some inspiration there. You already have a buyer if you make a 240Z with a Brie livery and all that kind of stuff. So see these gentlemen here, they'll help you out. With that, I want to thank a couple of people who help us put this together, because this was a unique event, not just that we have Peter here, and thank you, Peter, for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
I want to thank Nissan. I don't know if you guys have noticed, maybe you guys have been outside already, but Nissan North America, Nissan Design, Shiro Nakamura, who is the Chief Creative Officer of Nissan, has very kindly made our home here one of the stops on the West Coast debut of the Nissan IDX concept cars, which has been quite a joy here. We've spent some time with these cars. You've been all over the world with
Really
them.
an exciting car. I mean, they haven't had a really neat little, front engine, rear drive sports coupe in some time. And I think this car has a certain elegance and subtlety in design that you look at it, it doesn't look like a cheap car. It looks like, I mean, it's really, really beautifully designed car. And I think it's going to be a new standard for them, just like the 240Z was. You never know, it takes years and years and years for, time is the only real true test of a good design or not. And I think this one might stand that thing.
Which brings up a question from Kurt Wheeler. He wants to know if Taro, Randy, Shiro, or any of the guys at Design came to you on any input on that car, or those two cars.
That's all done in Japan. And
it's all done in Japan?
Beautifully done. It just, the quality of design and designers coming out of Japan is so good these days. It's really remarkable. There's always been some great stuff being done over there. A lot of it we never got to see here, and great ideas, but their sort of fabrication and race car building skills had not equaled ours until recently, and now in some areas they're surpassing what we're doing. So it's rare that a bunch of car guys get some guys from the car manufacturer. So yes, we'd like that car under 3,000 pounds. I'd like 300 horsepower, but he says 220 is fine. Definitely a manual transmission. So can you guys get on that for us? Thank you, Taro and Randy. But there are some other people we need to thank behind the scenes. There's Tim and Dan from Nissan North America. We got to give them a big round of applause. Tim and Dan from Nissan North America. They helped put the whole thing together, which was not easy. Of course, Shiro Nakamura, and then Taro and Randy. And then I got to thank you enthusiasts as well, because you guys some of you have come from San Diego, Sacramento, so I got to thank some of you guys who have organized this. We got Lenny. Lenny is somewhere out there. Lenny Arna. Thank you very much, Lenny. I want to thank Omar Liggett, who loaned us that car and is not going to get it back. Omar, thank you very much. The 240Z out there. And then from the Shelby side, I definitely want to thank Randall Richardson for organizing the Shelby Club. Yeah,
Randall,
thank you, Randy.
Thank you very much for coming and really getting the word out. Really appreciate that. And then just the clubs, guys. Thank you. Shelby, Corvette, and Datsun Nissan clubs, really appreciate you guys coming out.
And for bringing the cars, too.
And the cars, yes,
great
some
cars
amazing
out there
cars
today.
out there. I love the cruisins, man.
Well,
That's
that
one of my
Section
favorite
50
parts.
out there today is a real work of art.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to give you guys a bit of a heads up of what's coming up on the show. We've got a great lineup coming up. As you know, we like to do a couple of different guests to kind of give you guys really a good indication of key people in shaping the car world. Our next guest, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to meet a market maker. We're going to meet Craig Jackson, who is the CEO of Barrett Jackson Auctions. And I think most of us in the audience here, especially the Shelby crew, know that this gentleman has basically redefined the muscle car world. He's coming up on March 15th. Definitely don't miss that. He's going to be a very exciting guest. After him, very, very, very proud to announce that we are going to have our 50th anniversary Mustang celebration here at the Petersen Automotive Museum from May 2nd to May 4th. And there's going to be a number of activities going on, but one that I am truly the most excited about, aside from having the 2015 car here, is Formula Drift champion Vaughn Gittin Jr. will be my guest in the chair here on May, I believe it's the 3rd or the 4th. I have to come back to you on that one, but it's definitely that weekend. And then after that, we're going to go back into design and meet a man almost as crazy as you. We're going to meet Dave Merrick. Dave Merrick, who is the Chief Advanced Designer of Honda. This man has done some amazing work and really has guided Honda. And we're going to talk to him about where Honda's going from here, because I think we all have a lot of questions about that. And then after that, very, very excited to announce that the most winning long-distance race car driver in the world, Porsche Brumos racer Hurley Haywood, is going to be joining us on August 9th. Those shows are going to be coming up. We're going to have some shows in June as well as April, but we're going to keep those as a bit of a surprise for you right now. And with that, I want to show you a little bit of those Nissans outside. The one in the Brie livery, I'm going to go so far as saying Brie livery, is called Nismo. And then which one is your favorite?
Well, they're both pretty neat cars. I know that the car is going to really be the car that changes it all for Nissan, is be the sort of production-looking IDX, the free flow model. The other one's a great fun, you know, racy type car, but the little yellow car is
I gotta tell you,
so elegant.
The Nismo, not just because it's your livery, but they got side pipes on them. Taro, make sure we get side pipes on that car, the production car. Get on that. Guys, if you could share this with everybody. We've got the cars outside. Take pictures with them. Take pictures of them. Take pictures with Taro, Randy, John, Gail, Peter, me if you want. And definitely follow us. Follow MotoMan TV, all one word, on Facebook and Twitter. Of course, follow the Petersen Automotive Museum, Petersen Museum on Facebook, and Petersen_Museum on Twitter. And that's also at Instagram for both of us. You can see Peter here in Detroit with the Nismo car. Of course, I had to put you next to that one. And then here's his favorite, the Free Flow.
Neat car.
So guys, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on March 15th with Craig Jackson.
Thank you, guys. All right, very good show. Nice job. Oh. Charlie Slover, look at that. Gosh. All kinds of interesting people here.
Muted there. No, keep the mic on for now.
All right.
Rather than manhandle you right now.
Going downstairs for the book signing?
Because we got off topic on cars with side pipes. Peter is going to be doing a book signing downstairs. We have in the gift shop, we've got these books you can buy, or if you brought your own, Peter will sign these. Car models. Gail has brought, Gail is, as I said, boss of the operation. Gail has brought posters, die-cast models, previous books, I think, more posters. So Peter will sign any and all of that. So, and John Morton's book as well. And I'm sure, John, will you sign stuff for people? Will you sign stuff for people? Okay. If you're really nice to John, he will sign stuff for you. Give him candy. Yeah, he works for Johnny Rocket's Burgers. It's on, what cable system do you have?